Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to go over how to make a Sentry build in 2022, but it's basically not that different as it have been the last couple of years. So the first thing to look at is a Sentry is of course a deployable. We have it here, and the Sentry has various stats, which are of course not all listed here, but basically it's a deployable. You deploy it on the ground. By default, it uses up 30% of both of your weapons' total ammo. However, with some upgrades, it'll only end up using 20% of your total ammo. Also, if you have less than 20, or 20% of your current ammo, actually, you have less than 20% of your ammo in either gun, then you can't deploy a Sentry at all. And what else? The Sentry, it sits on the ground, it's taken some of your ammo, it shoots at enemies, it aims at their heads with a bit of a spread. With some upgrades, that spread is 2.5 degrees, which means that it might miss enemies that are far away, but it'll generally get headshots. It benefits from the headshot multiplier, but not from the one that you would get in your perk deck, just from the basic shot multiplier. And with some upgrades, which we're going to get into, it also ends up with 1,000 health. And it has a shield. We'll talk about that later. To refill your Sentry's ammo, you basically pick it up off the ground again and then redeploy it. And that is also how you repair a Sentry that's taken some damage to its health. Now, if the Sentry takes full damage to its health, then it gets destroyed, it's sparking, then you cannot deploy it again, and that Sentry is now destroyed for the remainder of that mission. Alright, so let's take a look at some skills. First thing we're going to take a look at is the Sentry skills, and that's basically pretty easy. It's this entire tree here. If you don't want to listen to this next section, you can just skip ahead, but I'll talk about why each of these things is important. So first up, we have this third law here. Basically, it reduces the ammo cost by a bit, and this protective shield aced. And that protective shield is actually really important because it makes the Sentry invulnerable to shots from the front. It can still get damaged if it gets shot at from the side or from behind, but it will take no damage at all if it's shot at from the front. So positioning-wise, you want to deploy Sentries in corners or at least up against walls whenever possible, so that the Sentries cannot be easily flanked. And at that point, the risk that they get destroyed is much lower. And especially on lower difficulties, they don't get destroyed that much anyway, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. This protective shield is really important. We move up. Here we reduce the cost of deploying it again, so at this point it takes 20% of your current ammo from each of your primary and secondary guns. And this is where we get the increase in health from 400 to 1,000. We'll get both of those. Then over here, we have an increase in accuracy that reduces the spread from 5 degrees to 2.5 degrees. And the Sentries rotate faster, and they have more total ammo in them, which means you need to refill them less often. Because basically the unupgraded Sentry just chews through your ammo really fast. And that's why we have something here. We have the AP Sentry. So first of all, we have a less noisy version of the Sentry. We'll take a look at that in a second. It's not a silent, it's not a stealth weapon, not a stealth deployable, but it is basically, it doesn't alert enemies nearby, so the enemies are more likely to focus on other things like you or your allies or your bots or your converts rather than the Sentry itself, which can be good in keeping Sentries alive, but it can be bad if you want the Sentries to be a distraction to draw fire. In any case, you do want this though, because it gets you to the Ace skill, which lets you toggle AP rounds on your Sentry guns. Now this thing is huge. Basically, without AP rounds, the Sentry is hard countered by shields, first of all. And second, and even more important actually, is that it chews through your ammo at an unbelievable rate, and it'll be empty all the time. But if you have these AP rounds, basically it shoots a lot more slowly, but with increased damage. And effectively, what that means is you get the same damage per second at a much lower ammo cost, plus with the added bonus that the Sentry can now counter shields rather than being countered by shields. So you want AP rounds active all the time. There's no reason ever to not have them active. And in fact, that's why I would recommend a mod. It's called the Sentry Auto AP mod that will automatically put your sentries into armor piercing mode when you deploy them, and will also lock them in that mode so you can't accidentally toggle them when you're trying to do something else. Because there's really no reason ever to not use AP, considering that you get the same damage, but you're conserving a lot more ammo by using AP mode. So definitely get that mod. I will have a link probably in the description. And let's move on. So here we have Jack of all trades. Sure, you can interact with deployables. Sentries are deployables. That is useful. But the aced one is actually interesting because it allows us to bring another deployable. So you could bring your sentry and an ammo bag, or sentry and a doctor bag. But what's even more interesting is that you can bring the sentry and the suppressed sentry for bringing 2 sentries. But before we talk about that anymore, we'll take a look at the top of the sentry tree, which is you can now bring 1 extra sentry gun and 2 extra sentry guns. So what this means is that you're bringing a total of 4 sentry guns when you equip it. And then if you equip another sentry with Jack of all trades, you get half the amount that you'd get of that deployable. So that means you get a total of 6 sentries. 4 of the one kind and 2 of the other if you take both suppressed and non-suppressed. So we'll take a quick look at that now. If we were to do that, see we now have ×4 here, and we could also add the suppressed one here. And the only difference with the suppressed one is that it doesn't draw enemy aggro unless they're super close. But essentially you want to take both. If you've invested so many skill points, which we've invested at this point, I believe 46 skill points into sentries, we might as well take as many as we can get. So now let's talk about what other skills could complement sentries. The reality is it's not that many. If we start at the beginning of our tree, you could get yourself some medic things. If you're playing solo, you might want to have a doctor bag instead of 6 sentries, 4 sentries in a doctor bag. For example, if you might want Inspire. Now about that, I will point once again to the Sentry Auto AP mod. You should really get that because without that mod, when you try to, say, shout at an enemy who's downed, if you're close to your sentries, you might shout at your sentries and change it into, change the mode from AP to the other mode or back and forth rather than inspiring someone. But with the mod, since you can't toggle it then your Inspire is sure to work and not to misfire the interaction on your sentries instead. If we go on, if you want an option to heal, you could go for Jokers. You could also go for Jokers if you want to go, say, a full AFK build where you want, your 6 sentries plus even more things that you don't control shooting at enemies. Then, since you're going to be having the sentries mainly shoot, you probably aren't going to go for one of the weapon skill trees because you don't have all that many skill points left. You might want to go for armor if you have an armor build. This is mostly just your own survivability, and of course you can get the less damage when interacting. That includes deploying and undeploying sentries. There is the idea that the kills by your sentries count towards this every 6th enemy you kill will drop an extra ammo box. I'm not sure if this is true. I've tried to test it, and it's kind of tricky to test. So I wasn't really able to confirm it one way or another. I'm not sure if that's actually the case. In any case, it is useful to have extra ammo dropping, because your playstyle will involve, having constantly redeploying sentries and putting ammo into them. Then we've got some more skills here that if you want to make a full support deck, you might get some more things in here. We're not really going to need anything here. You could get, your basic sprinting and so on. I'm always a fan of sprinting and reloading. I know a lot of people aren't. But what's interesting here is high value target. This also applies to bots, converts, teammates, and also sentries. So special enemies that you mark will take extra damage. So that could be something to consider. Once again, I recommend the auto AP mod because otherwise when you're trying to shout at things to mark them, you might toggle your sentries. And you can get some more survivability skills. You probably don't need pistol skills. I probably don't want to bother with Berserker since you're not going to be doing most of the damage. You're relying on your sentries to do most of the damage. All right. So we've got our sentry guns. We've talked about other skills. Now let's talk about perk decks. And basically, what you want is you want perk decks where the text says that they trigger the things that trigger on an enemy death rather than on you getting a kill, because your sentries will be stealing a bunch of kills. So you don't want to have your perk deck rely on you personally getting kills, because that will be more difficult. You also, if you're relying on converts, say jokers, for healing, keep in mind that sentries will shoot at people who are in the process of surrendering. So you might have to go somewhere where the sentries, a bit out of the way of the sentries, or you might have to undeploy some if you actually want to get converts. Keep that also in mind for your teammates. They might also need to do that if they want to get converts. But there are a couple perk decks that synergize nicely with sentries. First, I'm going to show Biker. Basically, Biker has a bunch of things that trigger when your team kills enemies, and your team, basically you can think of the sentries as teammates. All of this stuff applies. You'll get random armor gating and lots of healing. It'll basically be active. You'll have the stacks basically all the time because the sentries will constantly be active. While we're here, let's take a look. Where is it? Grinder is another interesting one. Damaging an enemy. This is a skill that also is affected by sentries. So the sentries damaging enemies counts towards Grinder, which means that you'll basically constantly have the healing stacks. Similar to Biker. If you want to go Grinder, that's another good synergy with sentries. All of this stuff applies. Now, we'll also dishonorable mention to Anarchist. Normally, the damaging an enemy conditions are the same between Biker and Grinder and Anarchist. But sentries are an exception, maybe because Anarchists would be too strong with sentries, but you do not get the random armor gating from sentries. So Sentry Anarchist is not as much of a thing. And finally, there's one more I wanted to mention. Where is it? Ex-President. So you store health for crew kills. This includes sentries. So the sentries will help you store health. However, you also miss out on this here a bit. You'll be storing lots of health from the sentries. However, the sentries will be stealing your kills. So you might have it's sort of you benefit, but you're also have some drawbacks here from having sentries. But that would also be a perk deck that I'd consider. So Biker, Grinder, or Ex-President. Basically, everything else is either neutral or harmed by sentries. Neutral when it has no specific benefit, and harmed when the deck normally requires you to get kills personally, and if sentries are stealing kills, then it's harder to do that. So, we've talked about perk decks. Now we get to the real interesting topic, which is weapons. And for that, you're going to have to excuse me for a second while I pull up a spreadsheet of mine. Now, I've talked about this in some other videos in the past, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But essentially, you want to have a weapon that has a good pickup efficiency, that it picks up a large percentage of its total ammo with any given ammo pickup. We'll start at the top. you basically... Ultimately, a lot of weapons are very similar when you standardize it for their total ammo count. Mostly assault rifles are fine. The high damage ones pick up a bit less. It used to be that LMGs had a slightly better pickup efficiency than they do now. I still run LMGs because of their huge overall total ammo pool. So you can shoot a bit and you likely won't run out that quickly anyway. Most of the pistols here look the same, just steer away from especially the AP pistol. Shotguns, the low damage shotguns, if you're looking to really min-max for sentries, you'll want to consider the shotguns. Low damage shotguns specifically. SMGs were buffed at some point, they're not that bad either. Except for the high damage ones here, in this bracket here. None of the akimbo SMGs are that great in ammo pickup efficiency currently. And a lot of the low damage snipers and medium damage snipers, up to 250, are very good at picking up ammo as well. So you'll want to think about maybe what synergizes well with sentries and what picks up ammo well and what synergizes with your playstyle. Snipers could be useful for picking off enemy snipers or picking off, say, high-value targets like dozers or medics from far while your sentries deal with all the common enemies close by. That's a consideration. LMGs are nice just because they have the huge ammo reserve, so even if they don't have the best pickup efficiency, it's still good enough that you won't have any issues. And what you might want to avoid is, despite the fact that grenade launchers theoretically have a high pickup efficiency, their total ammo is so low that rounding will start working against you. You cannot deploy 6 sentries if your total ammo is only 6, but you can deploy 6 sentries with an LMG if your total ammo is 400. That's no problem, but here rounding will get the better of you, so I wouldn't recommend grenade launchers despite them looking good on paper. What you absolutely want to avoid is anything that cannot pick up ammo. That includes all the rocket launchers, all the bows, all the saws, and you'll also want to steer clear of the flamethrowers, because despite their huge ammo pool, they pick up very little from any given drop. Now, all of this is subject to change in updates. It has changed in the past. It used to look different. So I will have the spreadsheet linked. Take a look at it yourself to see how your chosen weapons might perform. And I think that's bringing us towards the end of it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is a bit just the general play style that you might do with sentries. Sentries are of course best for, say, a defensive situation where, holdout is the perfect, poster mode or safe house defense, where you're not moving around, where you have to defend an objective for an extended period of time. They can be used on a lot of builds, on a lot of heists where you might still move around somewhat, but they're of course optimal where you're mostly defending somewhere. You can defend in the FBI room in the Hoxton Breakout, for example. You can defend things on Heat Street, but you will be moving a lot on Heat Street too, so it's a bit more work to constantly deploy and undeploy sentries. And if you're playing solo, you might want to take a doctor bag as your secondary. If you're playing with other people, go all out, take your 6 sentries. A little fun thing as well is that if you're on Crime Spree, there is a boost you can buy that gives you more to deploy. It increases your deployables by 50%, which means you could take a total of 9 sentries if you're taking normally 6. Of course, you can't deploy them all at once, but that's just a fun little thing. And I guess a final note, difficulty-wise, sentries are absolutely amazing. Overkill, mayhem, no problem there. Death Wish, if you're a bit, clever with your placement, place them up against walls and corners, they should survive pretty well. Death Sentence, they're still viable, but you have to be very careful because they go down easily. If the enemies are doing, 255 damage, that's only 4 shots that need to hit the sentry, and not be shielded, and the sentry will be destroyed. But sentries are very viable up to Death Wish. And especially if you're defending an objective for a long time, if you're doing holdout, if you're doing overdrill or something, that's the perfect use case. I hope this was helpful. Please leave any comments if you have any, and check out the links that I will have posted in the description.